Hello, dear viewers, and welcome to a new episode of Business Insider. The CBAM, or the Carbon Border Adjustments Mechanism, is a very important topic nowadays in Europe specifically, and it concerns us here in Egypt very much. We'll be talking about CBAM, about carbon trade, about carbon footprint, and about the situation here in Egypt, which is a global leader, by the way, in fighting global warming and climate change. Having hosted the, of course, November 2022 big event on combating global warming and climate change here in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. From our Cairo Nile TV studios, we'll bring you a new episode of the program here tonight, and we are very delighted to have with us in the studio Dr. Alaa Khalifa, a global expert in advanced technology, blockchain, and CBAM systems. A very good evening to you, Dr. Khalifa, and thank you
to be with you
for being with us. The pleasure is ours, sir. So, CBAM, this is the main, I guess, a new type of terminology for many of us, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Tell us about CBAM.
Okay.
And how big of an issue is this in Europe, and how important is it for us here in Egypt?
Of course. Because of the global climate change and because of the various different conferences that the world is taking, COP26, started COP27 and 8, what happens is that a lot of countries have taken measurements in order to decrease the carbon footprint and reach what we call today net zero. And in order to reach this target by 2050 to have zero carbon emission, or at least to achieve half of our carbon emissions being decreased and lower the carbon footprint for the whole world, in order to maintain the temperature of Earth below 1.5 degrees of an increase, which is the what we call today the global warming, which is what we call the greenhouse emission effect. Without this, without doing all of these measurements, we will lose this planet. So many countries around the world,
because we're not allowed to have the
because
temperature
the more
increase
carbon
more
emissions,
than 1.5 degrees.
Yes, the temperature, Earth temperature, if it increased more than this, we were going to have a catastrophic effect on the global warming and on Earth and also on nature, on everything. So there is a very serious major, I would say, regulations, I would say also action. This global action is being taken as a responsibility and a commitment by a number of governments in front of the United Nations. And what they did is that each government is trying as much as they can to do a number of measurements to lower the carbon footprint. And for this reason, we have a number of laws that have been issued in order to save the environment, or save environmental, or lower the environmental effects on our world today, on Earth. So the European Union have issued a number of laws. The most important of them was the CBAM, which stands for Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It is an adjustment mechanism that helps and encourages people who are exporting to the European Union to lower the carbon footprint in the products that they're bringing into the countries of the Union. So the mechanism basically implies or is going to have carbon tax on all the imports that are coming into the European Union. And it came out back in August 2023, and it gives, of course, a transitional period onto 3 stages. The first stage is until it's starting from January 24 until the end of 24 December. beginning of January, this is the first stage, which is
Right.
manual reporting. So every importer will have to report about the products that they're bringing into the EU. And secondly, starting from January 2025, they will have to report manually also. These reporting will have to be recorded and will have to have a track history. And you will have to spend that year in order to get compliant. And the only way to get compliant is to have a tool or a way to measure your carbon emission, to verify your carbon emission, and to report your carbon emission.
Right.
Either reporting would be automated reporting or manual reporting or consultancy, but you have to have track record of these carbon emissions. And these carbon emissions will be divided into 3 scopes. The first scope would be the product that you are importing into the EU, carbon emission as a what kind of product you are bringing into the EU, and what is the carbon footprint of that product. The second
Sorry
scope,
to interrupt you, but is it strictly confined to steel, cement,
yes,
and
yes,
so on?
Yes, I'm coming to this part. And the second scope is to have direct emission and indirect emissions, such as electricity, such as transportation. And third scope, which will be in the future, you will be having direct and indirect emissions and suppliers of the entire supply chain for that product that you are making. When the European Union brought out the CBAM law or the mechanism, what happens is that they put it as a first stage on 4 major commodities. The first one is aluminum, steel, and fertilizer, and cement. And they also added to it electricity and some of the chemicals, which is not applying to us. And they somehow both on the steel and on the electricity and the chemicals, and then they kept it on the 4 main elements: aluminum, steel, and fertilizer, and cement. Okay, so what concerns us in this regard is that we have all of these industries, and we actually export many of them to the European Union. So, for example, I'll give you, Egypt is exporting out of these 4 materials 3.6 billion euro every year to the European Union. And because of the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, the imports of fertilizers from those 2 countries have shifted to Egypt, which means now we have their market share. The war erupted. The European Union is no longer getting the fertilizers from Russia or from Ukraine, so they used to get a share of 26% from those 2 countries. Now the European Union shifted to other suppliers, and we were the closest supplier to them. This is the reason why fertilizers companies this year and next year are making huge exports to almost double up their exports to the EU.
Very good.
So we had a very good opportunity, of course, to increase our exports to the EU. But on the other hand, the 3.6 billion of exports out of those 4 materials, we have, for example, fertilizers is constituting almost 56% out of this, which means almost 1.8 billion in terms of exports to the EU comes out alone from fertilizers. We also have almost
1.8 billion euros.
Yes. We also have aluminum exports to the EU, almost 800 million. And we have also the steel, and the end is the cement. So we will focus on those 4 materials, which will be the ones that will be subject to the CBAM agreement. Okay, so what happens is that our manufacturers, they need to comply, the compliance year, starting from this year. They need to get ready for compliance for the CBAM load in order to meet the requirements of the CBAM. And how to meet the requirements of the CBAM? It's easy. You have to have an MRV system. The MRV system does measurement, reporting, and verification, and that's one of the most important thing, is that you have to do measurement of your carbon emission, you have to do reporting of your carbon emission, and verification. So you have to use a third-party verification for that. But you need to automate the entire process. So this will produce a ledger of data that it's in a mutable ledger, which means you cannot mess with it. And it has to be historical data as well. So every 3 months, every 2 months, every batch, everything, you need to, the customs in the European Union, they need to go to where they need to see your carbon emissions. Why they do this, why they see your carbon emissions 1 year back and 1 year ahead. The reason for that is because they wanted to make sure that you are doing your best to lower your carbon footprint. And in order to do that, they see your historical data. So if your carbon footprint is so high of your products and you bring them to the EU and you try to comply, no matter what your compliance is, if they see that you still have the same carbon footprint, then they will charge you carbon tax. And the carbon tax is between 20 to 25 or 30% on the difference between your carbon cap, which is the ones that we allow into the EU, or we allow into Egypt, or we allow into whatever the country regulations is, and your main carbon emission. If it's that difference between what is allowed and the higher carbon emission, it's what is becoming subject to
the
tax. The tax is a very heavy tax, and it would help you to lower these emissions by taking measurements. These measurements would change the way how you produce your products, how you lower your carbon emission, like, for example, changing the way how you get your electricity. Instead of getting them from the grid, you need to get them from a solar energy, or from wind energy, or from hydro electric energy, whatever the reason is. Sometimes you need transportation for transporting commodities, and sometimes the transportation could be electric, could be diesel, could be biodiesel, could be LNG. Any of these things are estimated that it has a carbon footprint. Why the European Union is doing this? For exporters bringing goods into the EU, for two reasons. The first reason is to make sure that there is compliance internally and externally. So basically, manufacturers inside the European Union complained that they are compliant to carbon emission cap, and outside there are products that come into the European Union that they don't comply with that cap. And that's the reason they did the adjustment mechanism. That's why it's called adjustment mechanism, CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. The second reason is that they want to encourage manufacturers outside the European Union to adjust to measurements that can lower their carbon footprint, and hence in helping the planet to recover and lower our carbon emission so that we can reach that goal of lowering the carbon emission at least by half of our carbon emission, and by 2050 hopefully we can reach net zero.
Dr. Khalifa, you've laid it out very nicely, really. And what I understand from your words is that we are before a big opportunity, but at the same time a huge challenge,
of course,
as well. So allow us to continue our discussion, but first, after taking this break, and it has to do, of course, with the greater Bayram, Eid al-Adha al-Mubarak. So let's watch this filler and come back with our dear guests here in the studio. Welcome back, dear viewers. Thank you for staying with us. You're still watching Business Insider with Dr. Alaa Khalifa, the global expert in advanced technology, blockchain, and CBAM systems. Talking about CBAM and its effect here on Egypt, the opportunity and the challenge. So, Dr. Khalifa, there's definitely, again, as we said before the break, a big opportunity, but at the same time, a huge challenge. So what are we doing to meet this challenge?
If we do a very simple SWOT analysis, opportunities, threats, challenge, and weaknesses. on this situation, we will find out that we have a very good opportunity to increase our exports into the EU. Egypt have a very close proximity to the EU, so we are more likely that to be used as the right country to import a lot of goods. So let's take, for example, aluminum. We can export a lot of aluminum to a lot of car factories in the EU, which is happening today, but we can increase that. Why? Because the carbon emission into these exports, once we comply to the EU CBAM regulations, we will be able to export more. So this is the opportunity. The threat is that if we don't get compliant enough, if we don't automate our reporting, if we don't show a verification body, if there is no verification the right way, exactly as mandated by the CBAM, there is a chance that they will go to other exporters around the world. See, there are 22 countries that are exporting to the EU. Among these countries, China, India, Russia, all these countries have higher
You're talking
carbon
about
footprint.
the four specific
Yes,
materials,
yes, for those four
aluminum,
specific
steel, cement,
absolutely.
and fertilizers. Yeah.
And they export nearly 80 billion euros to the EU. However, many of these countries have a higher and a bigger carbon footprint, which means that
we have a chance.
That we have a better chance to take much bigger carbon
share.
Yes, to take the market share and to make sure that once we are compliant, that our carbon footprint will get even lower and lower. Why? We have adopted a lot of renewable energy practices in Egypt. For example, we encourage people to use solar energy. We encourage people to get renewable energy sources. We are located in a very good positioning in which we will be able to get alternative sources of energy. So that lower the carbon footprint. Then, secondly, I would also like to emphasize the fact that because of the higher demand, people are evolving and making more and more adjustment in their policies, especially towards the environment. Okay. Compliance, how we get compliant, it's easy. You need an MRV system with you, measurement, reporting, and verification, plus you need an ISO certification, 2 ISO certification. And the ISO certification is basically after checking that you are environmentally friendly, that you follow environmental standards, that you lower your carbon emission by doing carbon trapping or changing your filters or adding smelters that are consuming less energy, or you are doing recycled materials into your production. For example, I'll give you the aluminum. 1 ton of produced aluminum out of bauxite consumes 17 gigawatt of electricity, and it costs about $350 US. And 1 ton of recycled aluminum, made out of recycled material, consume only 1 megawatt of electricity. Can you see the difference? From 17 megawatt of electricity to 1 megawatt of electricity, because you're using recycled materials. Okay. And how much the price for that 1 ton of recycled materials of aluminum is $450. So it's even $100 more than to sell it more. You know why? Because the more recycled materials you're using into your products, the higher, the more expensive your product is, and the more it's more environmentally friendly,
right.
You know,
right.
Towards the planet. So we have the opportunity. Our threat is to get other countries, other exporters more compliant than us, far more quickly. Chinese, Indians are relying a lot nowadays on recycled materials. They use almost 80% of the industries have been recycled out of recycled materials. Chinese, they are investing so much money nowadays into renewable energy. Most of the energy farms, like solar farms, PV farms everywhere, are mostly Chinese investment. There are lots of Chinese companies that are also investing into hydrogen energy, clean energy, also into wind turbines. All of these different renewable sources will contribute into lowering China carbon emission. We have an amazing opportunity to increase our exports into the EU by understanding what the CBAM is, lower our carbon emission, getting compliant or being compliant. All those manufacturers can be easily compliant by following the right methodology, doing the manual reporting, after that the automated reporting. There are 3 stages. We are in one of them right now, which is the voluntarily manual reporting. The next year will be compulsory reporting. And the year after will be the CBAM certificate. Okay, can you imagine that? So it gets into being really serious. And starting from January 2026, it's really serious. And what the the CBAM certificates will show what the carbon emissions, the reporting, they will follow the reporting, they will verify the reporting, they will make sure that these carbon footprint is getting lower and lower as you present anything inside the EU. The EU stated 3 different scopes. The first scope would be one that it's concerning the manufactured material that you are sending to the EU. Second scope, which the CBAM is going to also bring into the indirect emissions. So not only direct emissions into the materials, but also the indirect emissions, which is the transportation and the electricity. And the third scope will be the entire supply chain. So all your suppliers, all the people, starting from the quarry, from the bringing the raw materials, quarrying them into transportation, into getting them into assembly suppliers, into also manufacturers of various materials until you bring the final product. So there are 3 scopes, and there are 3 different stages of compliance. But as I said, the solution is simple. You need to make an assessment. If you have a factory, make an assessment on your products, the carbon emission in your products. You need to apply computer vision sensors on your product lines to make sure that your carbon emission is lower. You need to have these sensors speak to each other, which what we call today the IoT, Internet of Things. They speak to each other, and then they give measurement to an artificial intelligence system, which is the core of the MRV system. And the artificial intelligence system, what it does is that it measures the entire emissions, whether it's direct or indirect emissions, and then gives full automated reporting, and then verify this reporting through a third party. One interesting thing to know is that the technology, that the best accepted technology in MRV system is a blockchain technology, because blockchain is the technology where you are used for smart contracting. And it's a technology where they use nowadays for cryptocurrency, for example. Bitcoin is made of blockchain. Why the blockchain? The blockchain technology is actually putting every ledger in a block. So if every piece of information, it's being put in a block. Once you saved it, it's put in a block. And then that block, once you have something altered or changed or added, then they create a second block, and then a third block, and then they are connected to chain. And so when you are checking a life cycle assessment to any product, what happens is you need a birth certificate for the product, when it was manufactured, what happened to it, how many things have been added to it, what carbon emission came out of it, and all of these different things, etc., etc., etc. In order to do this life cycle assessment, you need that to go through the blockchain. So it's in a mutable ledger. So it's more verified, more credible in front of the EU borders, more credible in front of a lot of people. Computer vision would automate the process, and IoT sensors will make sure that you have the right readings and the right measurements. So what factories should do in the future once they comply to to the CBAM regulations once they issue the reporting and the CBAM certificate. They need to adjust themselves to the environmental practices. For example, lowering carbon emission by lowering the consumption of their energy. For example, shifting from taking electricity from the grid to solar energy, for example, you know.
You've laid it out very nicely, again, Dr. Khalifa, really. I have a number of questions for you, including,
yes.
There's no question that the state endorses and is backing and has the will, you know, to go green. And we saw in COP27, again, Egypt is a leader when it comes to fighting global warming and climate change. I don't know what is the interest of the private companies, you know, the private sector. Is it the same as the state or not? That's one. The second thing is there enough awareness of the urgency of the issue, that this is very imminent, this is very important, everything's going to happen very quickly in the next 2 years? So the second thing is about the awareness. The third is about the financing. How costly will this shift be? How costly will, you know, preparing the MRVs and the things you talked about?
That's to be adopted.
Yeah.
Every entity will have to adopt this,
right.
This compliance on its
and
own.
The fourth, sorry to put all these questions together, because we're going to take a break.
Sure.
And then when you come back, you will have the microphone again.
Sure.
The fourth is, yes, it's great for us to export. I mean, this is foreign currency. This is what we call here in Egypt hard currency. This is excellent. But what about the balance between, you know, exporting and your local market needs? Because, yeah, aluminum is very important. So if we are making it easier for Europeans to manufacture cars, and then we import the cars for so much money, well, why not put this aluminum here and you know, and make affordable cars for Egyptians? Same thing for fertilizers, a key commodity. So if you are exporting, you will not have enough fertilizers here. This means prices will go up, and prices of goods that are related to fertilizers, which are vital, will also go up. So what about the balance? The balance between getting the foreign currency and also meeting your local market needs. These are my questions.
Are you ready for the answer afterwards?
Yeah, of course I'm ready. But first, another break.
Okay.
Because I know that when I give you the microphone,
Sure.
you will, you know, put it very nicely in an orderly manner for the questions that we put forward to you. But again, allow us, Dr. Khalifa, and dear viewers, to take the second break here on Business Insider. Thank you, dear viewers, for staying with us. And back here in the studio, Dr. Khalifa, do you remember the four questions?
Of course, I remember the questions. And but are you ready for the answers?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
We want to listen to you.
Of course. First of all, let me just tell you what the efforts that we do it on a governmental level here. Egyptian government is very much aware of all of these things, and they have been in communication with the European Union. So many meetings on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs level, so many meetings on the Ministry of Industry, and also from the very special unit for supervision on exports. Export communities that are in Egypt, they are so much, we had so many meetings attending with them, and they are very much aware, and we were so much surprised of the fact that they have studied the entire thing, and they are ready for it. They are doing awareness campaigns right now. They're doing engagement campaigns with the factories right now, with the manufacturers. They're helping them thanks to this unit for the Ministry of Industry, the supervision unit on exports, and thanks to General Mukhtar, who is an amazing person, who's actually very sophisticated in getting the verification body. We're trying to get a verified body from the ISO certification in order to be able to verify the
When you say
reporting.
you were surprised, you mean you're talking on behalf of the private sector, right?
Now, of course, I'm a private sector.
Yeah.
When I sit with the government sector and see that the government sector is very much aware of what's happening, and they're getting compliant, and they're submitting the reporting, I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled that we follow these steps, and we are.
How much will it cost you, the private sector? Sorry for going fast, but because we only have 5 minutes.
I'll tell you. It doesn't even constitute 1% of what you're going to lose against the carbon tax. The thing is, so on the government level, we're doing well, and we will keep doing awareness conferences and meetings in order to enlighten the exporters how to be compliant to the EU. That's the first answer to your question. Second question is about if we export too much and we take a lot of market share into a country, does this lower our needs, our local needs? No, that's actually the quite opposite. The reason for this is because when you are required to export more, and because you're compliant and because you are meeting regulations, you will have to understand that this encourages you to invest more. So most of the factories that I have met, they are building second factories right now.
Excellent.
So which means that people are more encouraged to invest more because they know that they have a steady and sustainable market into the EU. So that's the answer to your question. And thirdly,
so exporting will not necessarily affect the prices here or make them go up.
I'm telling you, every factory I've met, they're building extension, they're building a second factory, they're going to the Suez Canal industrial economic zone. Everything. So that's one thing. The third question that about the CBAM, if you come one day and say, I'm not exporting to the EU, I don't need to be compliant, tomorrow you will have a CBAM from the United States, and you will have a CBAM from the UK, and you will have a CBAM from Southeast Asia. Everyone will have its own CBAM. Everyone will have its own Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So it's going to become...
Are we working on ours?
We are working on ours. Can you imagine that?
Good.
We are working. This is why I'm telling you we're extremely sophisticated, and thanks for the Ministry of Industry, thanks for the Egyptian government of putting the steps and the infrastructure to have this. We are having our own, we are building right now our own carbon trading platform to trade what is the... Every country there's something called cap and trade. Cap and trade means every commodity have got a carbon emission level, right? Can you imagine that's a cap? So that commodity would have this cap of carbon emission, right? What happens if you become more than the cap is that they will encourage you to lower your emissions. When you lower emission, when it becomes equal to the cap, that's fine, that's great, you're compliant. But when it becomes lower than the cap, much lower, even lower, no. What it creates for you something called credit, carbon credits. When it gives you that carbon credit, you can sell it to somebody else who has a higher cap.
Good. So
that's why it's called trade and cap.
Yeah, so
you can trade on your savings.
That's a stock market.
That's a stock market. That's called the carbon stock market. And we're having a carbon stock market in Egypt. It's an experimental right now. It's going to become mandatory in the future. And you know how much it costs the carbon, 1 ton of carbon? 80 euros, 1 ton of carbon. So carbon trading for some of the countries and manufacturers could be millions and millions of euros, just because you're doing something nice for the environment and also you're benefiting out of it.
All right. So on that note, dear viewers, on behalf of you, we thank very much our distinguished guests here with us in the studio, Dr. Alaa Khalifa, the global expert in advanced technology, blockchain, and CBAM systems. A great pleasure, and thank you for all of the information that you've given us, sir. Thank you. Thank you, dear viewers, for watching Business Insider, and happy Eid.